recording the audio of this because the kids that can't be here, students that can't be here, one guy's just doing stuff online, so I'm going to upload YouTube videos with all of the notes and everything and kind of go through it. But if you get your guitar handy, you've seen me do this all the time. It gives me a writing surface. If you don't want to write on the back of your guitar, you can use a magazine or something like that. For me, like, I guess around my junior year of high school, between sophomore and junior year, one of my teachers started introducing me to music theory. And it's like I could already play things, but it just made it to where I had more understanding about what I was playing. And so I'll tell everybody it was like going from black and white to color, or standard def to HD. So we're just, this first little bit is just fundamentals. And so if you know all this stuff, which you probably know a lot of this from piano, that's okay. This is just always good to review things, okay? So we'll kind of go over the definition of music theory. We're just basically analyzing what's going on in music and talking about the different possibilities that we have when we combine notes to make melodies, to make chords, and that sort of thing. And the first thing that we're going to talk about is intervals, and then we'll talk about chords and chord structure and that sort of thing. But I think one of the most, if you look at the very last page in this pile of notes, it's kind of set up like, if you hold it up long ways like this, it's all of the notes on the fretboard. And I think this is something that's pretty useful because as we build chords and that sort of thing, this very loud, yeah, you got it, okay. It's good to know, okay, what notes am I playing on what fret? If I play the 6th string, which is the low bass string on the 3rd fret, that's a G, If I play the 5th string on the 2nd fret, that's a B. And then the 4th string open, that's a D. Just knowing what the names of each note are. And for instance, if I know all that stuff, then I can take a G major chord and I can say, okay, that's a G, that's a B, that's a D, that's another G, that's a D, or I can play that string open, play a B, and then the 1st string, 3rd fret, that's a G. So we have a combination of G, B, and D. Some of those notes get doubled, and but the reality is any combination of G, B, and D, that's a G major chord. And so it's handy when you can come up and play, okay, so if that is D, that's G, and that's B, then technically that's a G major chord. Okay? And it'll help in the long run to work on memorizing the notes. I would say at first, if you can get up to the 5th fret, that's great. And if you look at okay, the 6th string, 5th fret is an A. That's the same pitch as the 5th string open. So that A and that A are the same. And then same 5th string, 5th fret is a D. That's the same pitch as the 4th string open. 4th string, 5th fret is a G. That's the same pitch as the 3rd string open. And this is kind of a really rudimentary way to tune a guitar, actually. Because I can go through and say, Okay, that's 5th string, that's E. So if I go then up to my A there, it should match my 5th string open. And I know that if those don't sound the same, the guitar's not in tune.
So if you get your E right, then you can just walk it up.
Yeah, you can tune everything. That's called relative tuning. You tune everything relative to that one pitch. So you can go, okay, that should be right. Those are both G's, or sorry, D's. These are both G's. And then my 3rd string, 4th fret, that's a B. That should be the same as my 2nd string open. And then for instance, like if I play the 2nd string 5th fret, and my 1st string is flat, then I tune those up to where they're in tune. And that way I can tune relatively. That's like if you're stuck in the woods and you don't have a tuner. You can actually tune your guitar to itself. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. So, and I kind of went over that diagram at the bottom of the first page. Has all those notes and how they correspond with the notes on a keyboard. So you have like the low E, and then the A above that is the 5th string. The D above that is the 4th string. The G above that, and I'm going from the bottom to the top. The G above that is the 3rd string, and then B above that, 2nd string, and E at the top, that's the 1st string. Okay? Everybody following so far? I'm saying a whole lot of stuff out loud because I'm going to put a video up for everybody else. Okay, so let's look at the second page. We're going to talk about intervals because I really quickly want to get to like how to build chords, and we got to understand intervals before we get to like the notes in each chord. One of the things I want to do with this is as quickly as possible get through like intervals and building chords and key signatures and that sort of thing, so that then we can start to analyze some music. You know, we'll a lot of stuff like when I was in a form and analysis class, we would analyze a bunch of Mozart sonatas, and because we were trying to get to the point where we could write a sonata, and so the best way to do it is like, okay, study a bunch of those and then kind of copy the style, you know. And I've done that on guitar my whole life, you know. Learn to play 10 James Taylor songs, and then you can play like James Taylor. You know, learn to play a bunch of Green Day songs, then I can play like Green Day, you know. So it's like you study the style, and then that gives you the tools to play in that style or to write in that style. So that's what I want to get to for the whole like songwriting portion. So a simple interval is anything that's less than an octave. So like you've got C at the bottom of the keyboard, and if I just go up to the next C, then everything between those two keys or those two notes, that's a simple interval. So that's like a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh. And then a compound interval would be like if I went from C up the octave to the next C and then to a D. Okay, because that's greater than an octave. So anything greater than an octave is compound. Anything less than an octave is simple. And at first, we're going to talk about all simple intervals. But we've seen chords that have like B minor 11, you know, C add 9. So those are referring to a compound interval. And it doesn't necessarily mean like if it has an 11, it doesn't necessarily mean that 11 has to be pitched higher. It's referring to that next note. Like you would go from, if I went up the ninth, I would go from C up an octave, so that's 8 to the next C, plus 1 is 9 to the D. So, so sometimes compound and simple intervals, it's referring to the same note. So like C up to the D right after it, that's a second. And then C up to the D past the octave, that's a ninth. They're both Ds, you know. And I'll explain like when we get further into chord theory why sometimes you would use C2 versus C add 9, or because technically it's the same note, same letter name. Okay, so we're going to start with the simplest one is a unison, and that's what we were doing when we were tuning the guitar, because we were playing like that A and that A. Okay, it's two notes, the same pitch, they're unison notes. So there's no like real interval between those two notes. It's just the same pitch. The next one is a minor second. Okay, so when we start talking about a second, so let's take like just the top string of the guitar. That's E. Okay, so we're going to call that 1. Okay, that's the 1. And if you look at your keyboard, if I go up from E being 1 to the next note, that's F, right? Okay, so if E is 1, then F is 2. So from E to F, it's a half step. If you look on the keyboard, there's no black key between those two, right? So that's a minor second. A minor second is a half step. So when I go from E on the guitar up a half step to F, that's a minor second. Okay? Make sense so far? Same thing, if I take the second string open, that's a B, and you look at the keyboard again, between B and C, there's no black key. So between B to C, that's a half step. So that's a minor second, because I'm going B is 1, C is 2. Okay? That makes sense? A lot of times that can be confusing, because people start on B and they'll go, okay, from B I'm going to go up 1 to C. But B is 1, because we're starting there. So you always, the first note that you're beginning on, that's 1. Everything after that, you count from the first one with the first note being 1. So B to C would be a minor second. Okay. So a major second is a whole step or 2 half steps. So same thing, if I go from E to F, that's a minor second. If I take that F and I raise it a half step, then I'm going from E to F sharp. And that's a major second. And I can do that on fretted notes too. So if I'm on the 4th string, 2nd fret, that's E, and I go up to the 4th fret, that's a whole step, because I'm going up E, F, half step, F sharp, whole step. So it's minor second, major second. Okay? Makes sense so far? Okay. So we have, if you look at the black keys, we have what's called enharmonic equivalence. Okay? It's a big word. It just means you can have one pitch that has 2 different names. So look at just the bottom C. Okay, if I go up a half step to the black key above it, I could call that C sharp or D flat. If I raise a C, then I would call it a C sharp. If I take a D and I lower it a half step, then I call it D flat. Okay? But under the examples down there, you see like the distance, that third one that says D flat to D, it's a half step, but naming it based on D flat and D, that can become problematic because you're using the same note, D, or same letter name, D. So we would always call that C sharp to D, because then it's a minor second. There's some like theoretical possibilities that make it really confusing, but we're not going to talk about those. Like, you could call that an augmented one. Okay, so where you have a D and a D flat, a unison, perfect one, that's the same pitch. If you stretch those two notes, see, that kind of gets into the theoretical world. It's just easier to call it C sharp and D. That's a half step. Okay, and then F to G is a whole step, because if you look at your keyboard again, you got F and G separated by a black key, so that's two half steps. B to C sharp, same thing. I go from B up a half step to C, and then C up a half step to C sharp. But it's still a second, even though I'm going up 3 keys, because I'm going from B to C sharp. Okay? All right. So, make sense so far? Okay, so with that, keep those 2 sheets out. Because we're going to look at, on page 3, we have a C major scale. And y'all please stop me if you have questions, because whatever question you have, someone else may have also. Any questions so far? I've never explained all this in this much detail all at once, so I need to make sure I'm doing it correctly. All right, so we have a C major scale. On the piano, the key of C has no sharps and no flats. So we're just talking about all white keys. Okay? So we're going to go around and name the intervals between each set of notes. Okay? So between C and D, is that a major second or a minor second?
Major second?
Mm-hmm. You can put major second, you can put a capital M too. Okay, so between D and E, is that a major second or a minor second?
Major.
Major. Okay, Mitzi, what about E and F?
Minor.
Minor. Okay. Will, what about F and G?
It's major.
Yep. Okay, G and A?
Major.
Major. A and B?
Major.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. And B back to C. Minor. Good. Okay, so now we've gone a full octave. And all that just repeats to infinity, The keyboard, has 88 keys, but that's just like, it's really just a section of frequencies, because it theoretically could go on forever. If we could measure the frequency lower than that and higher than that, there's a lot of instruments that play beyond what's actually on the keyboard. Violins and flutes, they play way, way up high. I don't know how far, if any bass instruments play below the keyboard, but okay. So now let's we're going to do this for each one of these. Okay. So in the key of G major, from G to A, what's that?
Major.
Major. Okay. A to B.
Major.
Yep. B to C.
Minor.
Yep. C to D.
Major.
Major. Okay. D to E.
Major.
Yep. E to F sharp. Major. And then F sharp to G. Minor. Yep. Because F to G is a whole step, we established that in the key of C, right? But if we raise that F sharp, that reduces a whole step to a half step. Make sense? So anytime you adjust one note, it actually changes the interval from the note prior to it and the note after it. Okay? Well, remember that because that's going to come up again when we talk about chords. So look at those first two. We got major second, minor second. Major second, major second, major second, minor second. Starting to see a pattern? Okay. So D major from D to E is a major second. E to F sharp is a major second. F sharp to G is a minor second. G to A, major second. A to B, major second. B to C sharp, major second. And C sharp to D, minor. Okay, so if you look at the key of G where we had, and if you look at the B, from B to C was a minor second, and then C to D was a major second. Now those are flipped in the key of D because we got B to C sharp, that's a major second, and then C sharp to D is a minor second. And because we switched that C sharp, that's what changed those intervals. Okay, so using a W and a H, we're going to write out the formula, and this formula is the same for every major key. Okay? So major seconds are whole steps. So we got whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And there's several things that I picked up along the way that I just, they're just ingrained in my head. And one is just the order of a major scale, like whole step, half step, whole step, half step. If you remember that, doesn't matter what note you start on, you can start on G sharp and go, okay, whole step, half step, whole step, half step. And I can play a G sharp major scale. Just by following that whole step, because 1 fret is a half step, 2 frets is a whole step. I can do that anywhere. I can start on a B flat. Do that anywhere on the guitar. Make sense so far?
So when you move from one string,
Uh-huh.
instead of going all the way down the neck, you're doing, like you're playing a key,
Mm-hmm.
but you do 2 or 3 notes on the 6th string, and then you're hopping up to the 5th string. You're thinking about that whole half and where.
Yes, and I've got to know,
You have to
that's
know
where
what
I got to know the names of the notes,
Right.
because I'm going like, if I was doing that G sharp, I'm going G sharp, A sharp. The next note is B sharp, so I can play it right there. So, and then I go half step, whole step, because that's a whole step, and play that same note right there, and then whole step, half step. Because this is a really inefficient way to play.
Right.
So that's where, like, knowing where, like, I have that note and that note the same thing, so I can play instead of that, I'll play instead of going up here, I have that same note there. So makes sense?
Yeah.
And it goes. the octave, up 2 octaves, same thing. Because once you make an octave, the whole thing just starts all over. Okay? Okay, so now we're going to talk about thirds. Thirds are my favorite thing because that's totally what chords are based off of. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the minor third. Okay? Minor third is if you take a whole step or a major second and you add another half step to it. So now you got 3 half steps. That's a minor third. So, for instance, E to G, and you might want that page 2 handy also. Because I've gone up from E to F, that's a minor second. E to F sharp, that's a major second. E to G now, that's a minor third. Because once I get to major second, I've exhausted my seconds. And now I'm going to thirds. So E to F, minor second. E to F sharp, major second. E to G is a minor third. And I bet you can guess what a major third is. We add another half step, right? So that would be like E to G sharp. Because I'm always thinking about E is 1, something, some version of F, either F or F sharp is the 2, and then G or G sharp is 3. Okay? But if we're just talking about E natural and G natural, it's a minor third because it's 3 half steps. Okay? Another one would be B to D. Okay? So if I go up, B to C, half step or minor second. B to C sharp is a major second. And then B to D is a minor third. Okay? Make sense? Okay. So now major thirds, it's 4 half steps, or you could just say 2 whole steps. Ooh.
It's close.
Yeah. They always say when you hear them, it's too late. My friend that flies a B1, I was like, tell me a little bit about B1. He said, well, by the time you hear it, it's too late. Okay. So we're talking about 2 whole steps or 4 half steps. It gets to be cumbersome counting half steps every single time. So if I look at G on the keyboard and I go up a whole step from G to A, because I just skipped that black key, that's a major second. And then I go up another whole step from A to B, that's another major second. So from G to B is a major third. Okay? Because again, I count G is 1, A is 2, B is 3. Okay? Same thing from C to E. If I start on C, then I go C to D, that's a whole step. And then D to E, that's a whole step. So from C to E is a major third because I got a whole step right here from C to D, and I got a whole step from D to E. Or again, I could count half steps. 1 half step to C sharp, another half step to D, another half step to D sharp, another half step to E. That's 4 half steps or 2 whole steps. Okay? So we got minor thirds and major thirds. Their only difference is a half step. Okay? That makes sense so far? All right, so let's look what happens whenever we start to stack thirds on top of each other. Okay? So we're going to go through these one at a time. From E to G, is that a minor third or a major third?
No,
It's minor, right.
It's minor, sorry.
That's all right. So minor third. Now from G to B, what's that one?
Major. That's major.
Major, right. Okay. So from A to C, what's that? Major or minor? Minor, yep. And then from C to E, major, right. Okay, we just did this from C to E. That's a major third. And then E to G, we did that on the first one. That's a minor third. Okay, and the last one, G to B, what's that one?
Major.
Major. And B to D, minor. Okay, so I'm going to play E, G, and B in sequence. And I want you to tell me if it sounds major or minor, okay? Minor. Okay? This is a simple way to think about these, but it doesn't always work because some minor chords can have like a little bit happier sound, but most of the time minor sounds sad, major sounds happy. If you want to give emotions to chords, then that's the way you think about it. So E, G, and B. Now we name that chord based on the 1, okay? And 1 is E, because that's the one we start from. Okay, so that's an E minor chord. And if I play just a straight up E minor chord on the guitar, and I analyze all of those notes, then I've got E, B, another E, and then a G, and then a B, and then an E. So I've doubled some of them, and they're not always in the right order, and that's totally okay. The idea is any combination of E, G, and B is E minor. I can actually take that first string and I can play a high G right there. Because now I've doubled that G. Instead of just having that one, I can add this one. But that's still E minor. When we start to add notes that are outside of the root, the third, and the fifth, that's when we get into like 7ths, 9ths, 11ths, 13ths, and that sort of thing. But any combination of E, G, B is E minor. If I take the bottom 3 strings open, I've got E, B, and G. Technically, those are the 3 notes of an E minor chord. Okay? Make sense? It's out of order because the root note, the E, is not on the bottom, but it's still E minor. You've seen chords where they have like E minor slash G, or E minor slash B. That's what they're notating whenever you have a chord that has an alternate bass note other than the root. They're telling you like, hey, this is still an E minor chord, but the lowest note I want to hear is a G. So that would be like that. Makes sense? Which is really useful whenever, if you're doing something with a walking bass line. See, that's just E and F, but I'm playing second inversions with each of those chords, or the first inversions. Okay, makes sense so far? Okay, so A, C, and E, I'm going to play those. sound major or minor? Minor. Yep. So that's A minor. Okay. Okay, C, E, and G. So here's C, E, G. Major or minor? Major, yeah. Okay, and then G, B, D. Here we go. Major or minor? Major, good. So some of this is also like ear training, you know? How many times have you seen me like picking out a song and I'm just fishing, trying to find out what is that chord? I hear the bass note, it's a G. Is it major or minor, you know? So sometimes like just listening and hearing that chord sounds minor, that just rules out half of your possibilities, you know? So it's really useful to be able to listen to a chord and go, that's a major chord, or that's a minor chord. So, looking at this, we can see, top of page 4, that, and kind of refer back to that we just did. A major chord is built using a major third on bottom and a minor third on top. Okay? Because, like from C to E, that's a major third. Then from E to G is a minor third. From G to B is a major third. B to D is a minor third. That's a hard, fast rule. That's never going to change. A major chord is a major third and a minor third. And opposite of that is a minor chord. The minor chords have a minor third on bottom and a major third on top. So E to G is minor, G to B is major, A to C is minor, C to E is major. So if I take E minor, okay, let's look at that first example on it's at the bottom of page 3, the E minor chord where we have E, G, and B. And I'm going to build it just from a standard E minor chord. Say I want to make that chord major. So that means I've got to switch those two thirds from E to G and from G to B. So if I take the third of the chord, which is the G, and I raise it a half step, I can't mess with the E because that's my root. So if I raise that G to a G sharp, then that minor third now becomes a major third, right? And because I raised the G sharp, and so I've augmented the interval between E to G, now it's E to G sharp, then I've actually, at the same time, I've diminished the interval between G sharp and B. Because it was G to B, now it's G sharp. I reduced that by a half step. So it's the third. The third tells you the quality of the chord. It's major or minor. So when I make that a G sharp, I get E major, E minor. So all I got to do is change the third. And we see that a lot. Those chords like A, you know, A major has A, C sharp, and E. So if I take the C sharp, I lower it by a half step, it becomes A minor. I take D major, which is D, F sharp, A. I take the F sharp, I lower it to F natural, I've got D minor. it's really easy to see on a piano. It's not always that easy on the guitar, because especially like G major, if I'm playing it like that with the second string open, I can't lower this note because it's an open string. So I've got to find a B flat. That's where we get into like having to play bar chords. Because some of those really hard to get. Like C, E, G is C major. Well, E is one of my open notes. That's the third of the chord. I can't lower that note unless I retune my guitar. So I gotta find an E flat, and then I'll build that chord differently. But C major, C minor. Does that make sense? In theory?
In this minute, it does.
And yep, currently it does. So, when we're building chords by thirds, we're going to do this using the C major scale, okay? And I did a lot of extra work for us in that I put a star by each of the letters we're gonna use, because we're building these chords in thirds. When we build a chord in thirds, we have the root of the chord, which is the name of the chord, and then we have the third of the chord, and then we have the fifth of the chord. Okay, so for instance, C major, C is the root, and what would be good is under each of these, I put the root. The root is in bold. Okay, so that's the starting note that we're beginning on. So I want you to put an R under the starting note, the root. Okay, so that's the root, and then we're going to count up 3 from there, starting on the C. So C is 1. We go C, D, E. E is the third. Okay, and then 3. That's E. So we go E, F, G. So G would be the fifth. Does that make sense? So you see now where sometimes you have like C suspended 4 or C2. That means they're going to add one of these notes that are in between the thirds. Okay? So the root is C, the third is E, the fifth is G. So C, E, G. That's C major. And we're going to call this the 1 chord, because in the key of C, we start on C. That's C's 1. Okay? So it's major because, following those rules that we just established, major chords have a major third on bottom and a minor third on top. Okay, so the 1 chord is always major. And I'm saying always, understanding that like occasionally these rules can be broken. Okay? Okay, so now let's look at the next one, the 2 chord. So it is the 2 chord, but we're going to start, D is the root. Okay? So now we're going to count up 3 from D. D, E, F. F is the third. F, G, A. A is the fifth. Okay, so we got D, F, A. Right. Okay, so it's got a minor third on bottom because D to E is a major second, that's a whole step. And then E to F is a half step, right? Am I following that so far? And then F to A is 2 whole steps. F to G is a whole step, G to A is a whole step. So it's our normal minor chord, which has a minor third followed by a major third. All right, so the 3 chord starts on an E, so E is the root. G is the 3rd. I'm erasing more than y'all are. And B is the 5th. And I remember I had flashcards in college. Like I could rattle these off, like EGB, FAC, just all the chord spellings and that sort of thing. You'll be able to do that eventually. So again, E to G is a minor third, G to B is a major third. So that's the formula for a minor chord. Okay, so far we have 1 is major, 2 and 3 are minor. Okay, 4 chord. Mitzi, why don't you do the 4 chord?
Okay, so from F to A is a major third.
Yep.
And then A to C is a minor third.
Yep.
So this is the F major.
Yep. Okay, Solia, why don't you do the 5 chord?
GBD.
Mm-hmm. GBD. G to B, is that major or minor?
Major.
Yep. B to D. Yep. So we got a major third and a minor third, so the 5 chord is a major chord. Okay, Will, you do the 6 chord.
E to A and A to C.
Okay, you're gonna start on A.
On A.
Yep.
Oh, I see. I didn't see the bowl.
That's all right.
A
Sorry,
to
it's
C
not that
and
bold.
C to E.
Yep.
I was like, that's not right.
Yep, you're right. So A to C is what?
A to C is a third, right?
Yep. What kind?
Major. Minor, major.
I don't know.
A to C
Mm-hmm.
is minor.
Yep. Good. Okay, and then C to E.
C to E is major.
Yep. Okay. So far we got major, minor, minor, major, major, minor. That's another one of those I've memorized a billion times. The 7 chord, though, doesn't fit those parameters because it's 2 minor thirds. Because B to D is a minor third, and then D to F is a minor third. Okay? So that chord is actually called a diminished third, or it's a diminished chord. So anytime you have a chord that's built on 2 minor thirds, that's a diminished chord. And we didn't talk about that one initially because it just doesn't occur that often. It does if you're playing jazz and like old hymns, they come around quite a bit. But not that often. A lot of times diminished chords are used as transitional chords. Like if I'm going from G to A minor, then I might throw a diminished chord. Like all those are diminished chords. They sound great in context, but it's not very often that someone just plays a lot of diminished chords together. So they're used a lot for like transitioning. Okay, So, to recap, we got minor seconds, that's a half step. Major seconds, that's a whole step. Minor thirds is 1.5 step. And a major third is 2 whole steps. And then we use thirds to build chords. If it's a major chord, then it's major third, minor third. If it's a minor chord, then it's minor third, major third. Okay? And then when we're looking at a major key, then it's always going to be major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. And that kind of goes from like whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. Lots of little things to memorize, but so you see how like you use the notes in the C major scale to build every chord in C major. You know, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. You just write that scale out and you just count by thirds, and you can build any chord in that key. Does all that make sense? Okay, so next time what we're going to do is we're going to go through the circle of fifths and go through really simple, easy way to memorize all the keys and all the chords. Okay, it's going to be really. There's a couple of little acronyms that make it easy to memorize, and we'll go through all that next time. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Any questions? No? I mean, I would encourage you to, as you're playing, and if you play a chord like that, C, go through it and go, okay, I know C major is C, E, and G, right? Based on what we did here. So if I play C major now, what are my notes? We've got C, E, G, C, and E. So again, you can double notes. If I play just a regular D major chord, then I've got D, A, D, F sharp. So I got 2 D's in there. Sometimes we double notes. Like with C major, I double the C and I double the E. So we would say that as like double the root and you double the third. But all you really need is those 3 notes. That's C major. Make sense? Okay. If y'all have any questions in the meantime, you've all got my phone number, email, all that stuff. All right. There we go.